This conference here is the only conference in the series of conferences that is actually a two-part conference. It's this plus the next one. And what it is about, and what the next conference is about, is the notion in the New Testament of love. Much used word, much discussed word. And what I hope to do is to lay out during these next two conferences the meaning of love in the New Testament. Why is this so important? Well, let me begin, first of all, by reminding you what we said in a conference earlier. To quote the biblical scholar John L. McKenzie, love is not the center of the Christian ethic. Love is the center, the circumference, and everything in between. What is not an act of love is morally worthless in the universe. Love is the center, the circumference, and everything in between of the Christian ethic. And we said he was just paraphrasing St. Paul in his famous hymn, 1 Corinthians 13. When Paul says, if I have all the eloquence of men and women or of angels, but speak without love, I have nothing but a gong booming or a cymbal clashing. If I have faith to move mountains, but am without love, it will do me no good whatsoever. If I give away all that I have piece by piece to the poor, and even if I let them take my body to burn, but am without love, I am nothing at all. And therefore we said that if those things, martyrdom, religious oratory, faith, and social service in the extreme without love do not save, then a cup of tea without love doesn't save. Remember? You see, what we were pointing at was that what we do in the Christian life, say giving someone a cup of tea, what we do carries spirit. Carries spirit. Everything we do carries spirit. I can hand a person a cup of tea in a way that they would rather die of thirst than take it. But I can also hand the person a cup of tea in a way that communicates care and concern and genuine love. And so it is not the handing of the cup of tea. It's not the social work as such. It's not the martyrdom as such, the faith as such, the religious oratory as such. It's the love that motivates it, or doesn't motivate it, that's the great issue. We all know that it's possible, to feign love, to make believe you're loving someone, but your real motivation is you want to manipulate them for some purpose. But of course, that's not what we're talking about. St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 13, without love, nothing. So we want to focus in on this concept, this notion of love in the New Testament, because it is so, so important. It is what we're supposed to be about practically on a daily basis. St. John of the Cross, the founder of the Discalced Carmelites, the co-founder of them, one of the great doctors of the church and great mystics, St. John writes this, an instant of pure love is more precious to God and to the soul and more profitable to the church than all other good works together, though it may seem as if nothing were done. Extraordinary, Utterly extraordinary, but totally consistent with St. Paul. An instant of pure love is more precious to God and to the soul, and more profitable to the church than all other good works together, though it may seem as if nothing were done. That's what we've been saying here. That's almost a summary statement of our conference. The communication that the Christ-like deed of love is everything Or, to use John L. Mackenzie's another sentence from him, the peak experience of the Christian life is the deed of love, meaning Christ-like love. You can't go any higher than that. It makes no difference if you have visions and this and that and euphorias. The peak experience of the Christian life is the deed of Christ-like love. And so we're going to spend this conference and the next conference taking a look at this New Testament notion, because it's so central to what we must be about as Christians. It is the central notion. An act of Christ-like love in the grocery store is of infinite significance to the church and to the soul and to the world. And once again, not because of us, but because of our union with God, because it allows God to work through us. Or said another way, we've been celebrating the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom here every day, the Byzantine liturgy that both Catholics and Orthodox in the East use. The first sentence in our liturgy book that the priest uses on the altar, the first sentence at the beginning of the book says, God is love, not in that love comes from God. Love is God. We are participating in the reality of God when we participate in the reality of love. God is love, not in that love comes from God. Love is God. The mystery, the incomprehensible mystery of the divinity is somehow in the reality of that simple deed in the grocery store of Christ-like love. And that's why St. John of the Cross says, one instance of Christ-like love is more profitable to the soul and to the church and more precious to God than all other works put together. That's incredible. And so we're going to spend these two conferences on love, this one and the next one. And yet we don't want to forget. We don't want to forget the simplicity of what we're talking about. We're going to try to make things more understandable. We're going to try to come at it from different angles, especially scripturally. But in the end, we want to be very, very clear. This is simple. This is simple. It's like walking, you know. When you walk, it's a simple process. But you try to explain it and try to write about it, it gets awfully complicated. So maybe we're going to complicate things just to try to give people a little motivation, give them a little insight, give them a little energy to do this. But it really is a simple task. And as I again look back to the back of the church here at the picture of St. Teresa of Lisieux, I think how simple it is. Because remember what we said. The new commandment, the only commandment that's unique to Jesus in the whole gospel, is the commandment that defines love. When he says, I give you a new commandment, love one another as I have loved you. He is the definition of love. And so all we're called to do moment to moment to moment is to ask, what would Jesus do here? And then do it. Oh, you say that's too simple. I said that before and I heard it, but it's too simple. I look back at St. Teresa, and I will assure you that the famous little way that St. Teresa talks about, the famous little way is nothing but the new commandment. To love as Jesus would love in the moment. Let me read you a few sentences from her famous autobiography, The Story of a Soul. The most read book in the Catholic world in the 20th century. St. Teresa says, among the countless graces I have received this year, perhaps the greatest has been that of being able to grasp in all its fullness the meaning of love. I have striven above all to love God, and in loving Him I discovered the secret of those other words. Not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father. Jesus made me understand what the will was by the words he used at the Last Supper when he gave his new commandment and told his apostles to love one another as he had loved them. When God, under the old law, told his people to love their neighbor as themselves, he had not yet come down to earth. As God knows how much we love ourselves, he could not ask us to do more. But when Jesus gave his apostles a new commandment, his own commandment, he did not ask only that we should love our neighbor as ourselves, but that we should love them as he loves them and as he will love them to the end of time. O Jesus, I know you command nothing that is impossible. O Jesus, ever since its gentle flame has consumed my heart, I have run with delight along the way of your new commandment. Now, we have all heard about St. Teresa's little way for so many years, all our lives. But did you ever associate it explicitly with the new commandment to love one another as I have loved you? Because that is explicitly what it is. Now remember, St. Teresa was a Carmelite, Discalced Carmelite. And St. Teresa was several hundred years after the founders, St. Teresa of Avila and St. John of the Cross. And therefore, she would have read at some point exactly what I read to you a few minutes ago. And somehow it all clicked to her that an instant of pure love is more precious to God and the soul and more profitable to the church than all other good works together, though it may seem as if nothing. And isn't that her life? It seems like nothing, her life seems like, on the surface when she dies on September 30th, 1897, a TB at 24, in a Carmelite convent. But the power that went out from it, because once she saw the new commandment was it, then she did it. So above all else in these two lectures, while the lectures are two lectures, what they are about is something very, very straightforward and transparent. To simply ask the question in the moment, what would Jesus do here, and do it. To commit each day's life to moment, being Jesus in the moment. Now, with that said, I would like to begin this discussion of love in the New Testament by mentioning just a fact. The New Testament is written in Greek, all 27 books, a form of Greek called Koine Greek. In Greek, the common word for love in Greek is eros. Eros means love. Okay? Plato, for example, in Plato's dialogues, it's used hundreds and hundreds of times. It doesn't just mean like we think of it today in English, erotic love, sexual love. It does mean that kind of love between a man or a woman sexually. But it means far more than that. It's basically, if you will, it is the love of mutual reciprocation. And so, indeed, you could say about your husband, a wife, a girlfriend, a boyfriend, I love you, you love, and so forth, and you use eros. But you'd also use eros when you say, I love God. I pray to God. God hears my prayers. God answers me. I pray to God, and we have this mutual relationship. You'd use eros. But you could also use it analogically. For example, in English, you'd say, I love a McDonald's hamburger. Right? And it would be eros would be the word. It's the common, ordinary word that's used without exception in Greek for love. In the New Testament, the word love, L-O-V-E in England, the word love occurs 338 times. 338 times in the New Testament. Of the 338 times in the New Testament that love appears, remember the New Testament is written in Greek. Of the 338 times, eros never appears. Eros does not appear on a single occasion in the New Testament. This is extraordinary. There is no way that eros could not appear unless those people doing the writing over a period of anywhere from 20 to 80 years after Jesus were totally conscious that this word did not describe the love that was salvific. It has to be intentionally kept out in order not to appear, because it would be the normal pattern of speech. The word that does occur is agape. 318 times of the 338 times that the word love appears in the New Testament, the word that appears is agape. The other 20 times, the word that's there is philia, which means brotherly or sisterly love, like Philadelphia. Philia, a brotherly, sisterly kind of affection. Agape is the word in all the great sayings that we know of Jesus about love, starting with, love the Lord your God, whole heart, whole soul, whole mind, whole strength, love your neighbor as yourself. The word is agape. Love of enemies, the word is agape. Paul's great hymn that I just quoted, if I have all the eloquence of men or angels with them without love, I am nothing at all, etc. 1 Corinthians 13. Every time the word love is used, it's agape. Every time it's agape. So what does agape mean? Agape means unconditional care or love. Unconditional care or love. And so we see the difference immediately between eros and between agape. Immediately. Eros is a love of mutual reciprocation. In erotic love, there is always something I am getting back. And that something has to be there, or else I can't even use the word. So, for example, you have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and let's say your girlfriend, and you're in love with this girl, and you're calling her up on the phone, and you're on the phone talking to her, you want to go out with her, 7 nights a week, and so forth and so on, and every time the phone rings, we want, is that her, because it's a good feeling that comes when she calls and everything else, eh? And then when the feeling leaves, and the phone rings, and someone picks it up, and before they grab the phone, you say, geez, tell her I'm not here, tell her I'm not here. You can't even use the word eros. See, there's no mutual reciprocation. That's what the eros are. You love God. You pray to God. God answers your prayers. Everything goes well, so forth and so on. And then all of a sudden, you pray to God. God doesn't answer your prayers. As a matter of fact, things go terrible. And then all of a sudden you don't know if God exists, you don't pray to God, you don't, and so forth and so on. It meant the love was erotic. You were in a situation of mutual reciprocation. It's love, but it's eros. And the problem with eros is what? It never appears once in the New Testament. Or hamburger, just to use this little thing when we say we love a hamburger, we love a McDonald's hamburger, something like that. Well, fine, we love a McDonald's hamburger. We really say it. Geez, I love a hamburger, Every time I pass the Golden Arches there, I got to get a hamburger. I just love those hamburgers. Right? And I get something. I like the taste. It really feels nice. And then after 385 Big Macs, I hate the hamburger. Can't stand the taste of it. I can't without the mutual reciprocation, I can't even use the word love. Whereas agape, the word agape means there's no concern for reciprocation. The only concern is there's a need there, period. Nothing more than that there's a need there. It doesn't mean the reciprocation has to be bad. That's puritanical, That the only thing in the Christian life that's good is when you feel bad. Eh? That's puritanical. No. What it means is you love on the basis of the need, not on the basis of what you're getting back. You love not because you're going to convert someone to Catholicism. You love because the person is hurting. It's that simple. And so you see, for example, how you could never say, now just follow this a little bit, how you could never say, love your enemies, eros. Eros could never be the word. Because the enemy is the one that gives you negative reciprocation. Love your enemies can only be used, you'd have to use agape. Because it's unconditional love. The enemy is a human being, the enemy's in need, and therefore you love him or her or whatever. Now, if to this moment in time in your life, no one has ever told you that the English language translates 3, actually 4, Greek words by the word love, L-O-V-E, can you imagine the chaos that results in people's minds when they don't know the distinction? Because the chaos is, what? That they read the New Testament and all this talk about love, and they read it in terms of eros. They read it in terms of eros. I mean, I'm sure that any one of the priests here, and possibly some of the sisters, and possibly yourself, have met people, because you come across this sort of thing continually. Right? And someone is involved in an illicit romantic sexual affair, of some kind. An illicit romantic sexual affair. And they come in to talk to you about it. And they quote you St. Augustine. St. Augustine said, love and do as you will. Love and do as you will. Well, yeah, love and do as you will if it's agape. Love and do if you will, as you will, and it's eros, and you've got total destruction on your hands. You've got chaos going. And so if you haven't thought to this moment in your spiritual life about the distinction in these words, it certainly is something to, from here on out, just reflect upon. What is the symbol for eros that we use universally? The symbol for eros is that little chubby cherub with the bow and arrow, remember? And he shoots the arrow into someone's heart, and as they say, the person is smithened, or something like that. And they're in love. Eh? But you know, the only problem with that little myth is this. That little myth contains, the warning that the point of the arrow only has a finite amount of that liquid that causes that feeling. And so when the liquid wears off, all of a sudden you don't love anymore. Eros is fundamentally based in the emotions. Fundamentally based in the emotions. Now, what's the symbol for agape? The symbol for agape, of course, is the cross. Is the cross. There is nothing that could be worse emotionally. Nothing could be more negative and repulsive emotionally in terms of loving, than being crucified and then loving by praying for those who are destroying you. You see, agape does not reside in the emotion. It resides in the faculty of will. I choose to love as Christ loved, whether I get back positive or negative emotional response. I'm sure when Jesus performed changing the water into wine at Cana, there was positive emotional feedback. Someone needed help, he did it, and they were grateful, And they probably came and said thank you and so forth and so on. But on Calvary, no one said thank you. To use St. John of the Cross's language, it's as if nothing had happened. He said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Who heard it? Who knew about it? It was just another minor event in history. And yet, it was more precious to God and more profitable to the soul and the church than everything else that was going on. God is love. The Greek is ortheos agape estin. Agape. God is love, agape. God is unconditional love and care. It's when we live in that spirit that we live in God. How many of us condition our love on getting what we want? Or use our love to make conditions on other people's lives? If you love me, you will do this. That's not God. God loves. God forgives. God doesn't manipulate. God loves just because there is a need for love. Now, this really does represent a critical difference in terms of what we mean by love. St. Teresa of Lisieux, as I mentioned, the new commandment, to love as Christ loved, is the essence of her little way. That's what she did moment to moment. But when you read the story of a soul, and still more, when you read the different biographies about her that have been written, it is very, very clear, to use her phrase, in the convent, to love, this is her phrase, cost her much. Cost her much. It wasn't a matter of a positive emotional response coming back. It was a matter of will. This was the will of God, and I conform my will to the will of God. It's that simple. Even though a lot of times what comes is a negative reality. And so we are confronted here with something new, perhaps. Something new that we really have to think about. Because this is really different. I assure you, there is no way in the world that the term agape could wind up exclusively in the New Testament as what Jesus is talking about, and eros be totally missing. I think in all of Plato's dialogues, I'm not quite sure on this, but this is approximately right. I think Plato uses the word love 400 times approximately, and he only uses the word agape twice. It's a non-used word. It means something that was somewhat foolish. As Paul says, the cross is a scandal to Jews and foolish to the Greeks. Doesn't fit, To love just because there's need without worrying about, but this is our God. Ortheos agape estin. This is our God. It'd be a terrible thing, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be a terrible, terrible universe if it were ortheos eros? Because then God's love for us would depend upon what? Ourselves. How we were responding. Were we making him happy or something like that? And that is in fact the way people most of the time perceive God over the whole history of the world. They cringe in terror. And Jesus comes along and says, no, God is Father, Abba. Ortheos agape estin. You're a parent. You know darn right well that just because a child goes bad, just because he goes on drugs, just because she goes out and starts doing things that you find just terrible, You don't agree with the things, you don't tell them they're right, you tell them they're wrong, and so forth and so on. But as you see the pain that the child is going through, you don't love the child any less. In fact, you may love the child more, because they're trapped and caught in something terrible. So also with the Father, who does not withdraw love, but who loves unconditionally. And so this is the beginning of trying to understand what it means to love as Christ loved, Of course, once again, if you have never thought of the difference between the two words, and you've just been interjecting the English L-O-V-E, thinking it eros and never thinking of agape, then you've got spiritual chaos on your hands. St. John of the Cross was a scripture scholar. He knew what was going on. He could read the Greek. And so, as a way of beginning then, our discussion of love, first we look at this. Next, I want to talk about what are those two dimensions of agape that exist in the New Testament that absolutely everyone agrees are there, of which there is no agape without them. Other people add other dimensions, In fact, I would even add one myself. But these two dimensions, everyone universally agrees are there in the New Testament as the manifestations of agape, Christ-like love. And so, the two dimensions of agape that are incontestably there, if you will, two facets of agape that are incontestably there in the New Testament, in the Gospels, are first of all, agape means the willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation. The willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation. This is summed up in the New Testament in the theme of the suffering servant. The second dimension of agape that's there is the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. The willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. This is summed up in the theme of forgiveness 70 times, 7 times. The willingness to serve without the desire for reciprocation. The willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. It is by participating in these dynamics that we create reconciliation between ourselves and others, reconciliation between ourselves and God, and hence peace. What I would like to do now, for the remainder of our conference, the few minutes we have left for our conference at this time, is I'd like to examine the first of these, the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. In our second conference, I will examine the second of these as being practical ways of living. Practical. The biblical scholar John L. McKenzie says, Jesus Christ is the only person who has come to earth that has taught us a practical way to peace. A practical way to peace. The only person who has come to earth who has taught us a practical way to peace. Most people, when they think of Jesus, his Sermon on the Mount, and his teaching, they say it's impractical. McKenzie says he's the only one that has taught us a practical way to peace. I will parenthetically mention here, it may not be of any interest to you, I'll just mention it. The most discussed intellectual in the world in the last quarter of the 20th century is a Frenchman by the name of René Girard. René, and then Girard is Girard. In 1972, he wrote a book called Violence and the Sacred. And when they reviewed the book in Le Monde, the reviewer said that there should be an asterisk placed next to 1972 in the history of humanities. Girard's book changed everything. A whole new way of looking. Girard has gone on to write several other books. He is professor of literature, French literature and culture at Stanford University, holds the chair there. He's a Catholic man, about 70 years old. Now remember what I said. At the upper echelons of world scholarship, this is the most discussed person in the world in the last 25 years. I assure you of that. What he has said has tremendous implications for anthropology, sociology, psychology, religion, economics. It's not my purpose here to discuss Girard. It's only to say something. René Girard says in his writings that the only way, this is the thesis of what he's talking about, the only way that secular society can prevent itself from literally destroying itself, emotionally, psychologically, politically, and economically, is to take seriously, he uses the word, the teachings of the nonviolent Jesus who teaches a nonviolent God. This is not faith he's talking about. This is examining the Gospels, not as a faith issue, but as a statement of truth verified by human existence. Let's go back to McKinsey. Jesus is the only person that came to earth with a practical plan for achieving peace. And that's what I'd like to talk about now, that practical plan for achieving peace. First here, and then later here. Okay. The normal process, the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. You know what the normal process is. Y and X get in a conflict, okay? So Y does something evil to X. And X says, oh, I'm not going to put up with that. Not me. So X returns evil to Y. Y says, like Gandhi said, every human being starts a conflict not really sure that he or she's morally right. But once someone returns, evil for evil, now they're absolutely sure the other guy is no good, and they were right starting it. So Y says here, oh no, I'm not going to let him get away with that. So he returns evil for X, and X returns evil to Y, huh? And then Y back to X. And so we have the basic eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, arm for an arm, leg for a leg, tongue for a tongue, ear for an ear, hand for a hand, until we have two people who are blind, toothless, legless, armless, speechless, and one of them is in so much pain and agony that he screeches for the other to stop hurting him. And that's what the world calls peace by victory. There is never, never, never peace through victory. There is humiliation and all the dark ripples that go out from it, whether that's in the family or whether that's in the nation. No peace through victory. Victory just means you can hurt better in the moment, and therefore you can quell something. So what does Jesus teach? Does Jesus teach that when Y does something evil to X, if X is the Christian, does Jesus teach that X should do nothing because he's a Christian? No, absolutely, positively not. The teaching of Jesus is not that a person should do nothing in the face of evil. That is not Jesus' teaching. Jesus' whole life is a combat against evil. His whole life is resistance to evil. But it's how we resist it that's the critical question. And Jesus' teachings are very clear by word and by deed. When evil is done to you, your task is not to do nothing. Your task is to return good for evil. You are to return good for evil. St. Paul says it very, very clearly, overcome evil with good. Jesus models it in the extreme on Calvary when he prays for those who are destroying him. Father, forgive them. You see, no human being could possibly live in this world in the situation of being constantly bombarded by evil and doing nothing in the face of it. They would psychologically, emotionally collapse. You all heard the saying, power tends to corrupt and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely, meaning the power of violence. But psychologically, it's equally true. Powerlessness corrupts, and absolute powerlessness corrupts absolutely. Jesus renounces the power of the world. He does not renounce the power of God, which is what? The power of love. He uses the power of love. He returns good for evil, love for evil. And he teaches that. That is a position of powerfulness, not powerlessness. It's not the power as the world defines power, but it's genuine power. In fact, it's the only power that can conquer evil. And therefore, Jesus' teachings are simple. Overcome evil with good. That's the response here. Now, the practicality of it is this. First of all, if X doesn't return evil here, Y does something to X, X doesn't return the evil, that stops all this. This all stops. Just this practical. Secondly, when you start doing good to people, it gets harder and harder for them to do bad to you. In the end, there may be a possibility that you may lose. You may die, rather. People may die. But that's not the issue here. The issue is St. John of the Cross. One act of Christ-like love is more precious to God, more profitable to the soul of the church than all other things together. The issue is being Christ-like in the moment. But there is genuine practicality to being Christ-like. First of all, this whole terrible thing doesn't go on. Back and forth, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, with all the humiliation and the anger and so forth that sends out ripples over years or generations. But secondly, practically, real love is being done. Look, Jesus is the Word who was here before the beginning of time, through whom all things were created. He is the Word become. He knows how to conquer evil. And he says the way to overconquer evil is to follow me. Return good for evil, love for evil, even to the enemy. But the teaching is universal. Jesus knows evil, and he says, in the face of evil, do love. That's what he's saying. And that's all evil. And I just say this parenthetically, even those evils that you don't know their source. The task is to use them as a catalyst to do love. You see the issue here? Usually, the way life usually works in this world is this. This fella starts evil, or group, or whatever. Evil catalyzes evil, catalyzes evil, catalyzes evil. In other words, evil is a catalyst for itself. The practicality of Jesus' teachings is what? That by us, the Christian, using the faculty of free will, which they have, evil becomes a catalyst for doing good. I will return good for evil. Evil now becomes the catalyst for its own self-destruction. That's the practicality of what's being said. Instead of evil being what it has been throughout all history, the catalyst to catalyze itself, evil catalyzes evil, catalyzes evil. Jesus first steps in and says, I will make evil the catalyst for good. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And on from there. It is practical. It's practical in the family. It's practical in any place. We look at agape in this form, the willingness to suffer without the desire for retaliation. And the important word here is, without the desire. Many people suffer and don't retaliate, but wish they could. That's not what we're talking about here. Right? That's not what we're talking about at all. What we're talking about is, there is no desire to retaliate, because I've got it very clear in my mind that my life is to be moment-to-moment acts of Christ-like love. Because I understand that it's the act of Christ-like love that is the most precious thing in the world. Precious to God, precious to the soul, and profitable to the church and the world beyond all other acts put together. That's why I don't have the desire. Because I have replaced this desire with the desire to imitate Christ. And now just let me focus one final moment on the practicality of returning good for evil, of following Jesus in the face of evil being done to you. I mentioned before, there are those evils that we cannot put our finger on, yet we suffer. And when they hit us, we can't say they're not evils. Yet Jesus' teaching remains the same. use evil as a catalyst for its own destruction. Return good for evil. Create good out of evil. Let me give you an example. Back where I lived several years ago, there was a major blizzard. 2-day blizzard. Unlike anything we had in 100 years. And so, in the first afternoon of the blizzard, a child went out to play in a city not too far from mine. Town. And the child went out to play, and night came, and the child hadn't come home, 10 years old. The parents got worried. They went out, looked for him, couldn't find him. They looked all that night. They called the fire department, the neighbors, and everyone's looking for him. They can't find them. They couldn't find him the next day. They searched for 2 or 3 more days looking for him, and finally they gave up. They assumed he was dead someplace or kidnapped. But he was gone for sure. This 10-year-old little boy. You can imagine the anguish of their hearts. Just like Mary and Joseph looking for Jesus in the temple when he was 12. And so that's the way it stayed for almost 2 weeks. He was missing. He was gone. They didn't know where he was. Assumed dead, maybe kidnapped, being tortured, whatever. But he was missing. And the last memory they had was when he walked out into the snowstorm to play. 2 weeks after it was all over, snowstorm stopped and everything. 2 weeks after, they found him. He was dead. He was 10 feet from the back door. An avalanche had come off the roof of the house and knocked him down, and he suffocated. 10 feet from the door. If he had gotten just another 10 feet, he'd be alive and well, but he didn't make it. And those parents were just crushed with evil. They were overwhelmed. You can't tell people like that in that situation, oh, it's God's will. And so God doesn't want the death of anyone. God is life. God is love. Why these things happen, we don't know. Evil, as I said earlier, is a mystery. Only 1 inch shorter than the mystery of God. And so they're overwhelmed and they're crushed. And in the United States, 85% of the families that have the death of a pre-puberty child wind up in divorce. I've seen it twice. It is a terrible reality to have a child die on you. And yet I know what has to be done. I know what the truth of the matter is. What they have to do, what they did do. They have got to do good in this world that never would have been done but for their responding to the evil that they're suffering, the death of their child. And that's precisely what they did. They set up programs for homeless children, children that run away and are out in the streets and so forth. Programs that help children. Programs that never would have been set up. Children, therefore, helped who never would have been helped but for this death. They drew good out of evil by will. The suffering is real, but they chose to overcome evil with good. And that is what we all must do. That's how evil is overcome. The normal process is the death of the pre-puberty child produces chaos in the family. Evil produces evil, produces evil. Jesus says you do good that never would have been done in this situation. Do it because you're following me. Do it because this is what your life is in good times and in bad. Do it because this is the most precious act there is to God. Do it because this is what it means to be baptized with me and to follow me. In the face of any kind of evil, don't respond in kind. Choose, like I did on Calvary, to do good. Literature is loaded with millions of examples of people who were destroyed like Jesus and who finished their days cursing those who were destroying them, calling down curses, calling for revenge, saying that they will not forgive, indeed even asking God not to forgive those who are destroying them or those they love. But Jesus goes the other way. In the face of evil, he chooses by will to do what God wants done to people, not what he wants done. And what God wants done is the act of love, the act of love, the act of love. This is the Christian life. This is agape. This is the love of the New Testament. This is loving as Christ loved, the new commandment. And this is that precious act, the act that St. John of the Cross says, more precious to God than all other acts, and more profitable to the soul and to the church than all other acts put together. There is a real choice here. Well, Jesus calls us to something wonderful, divine, and extremely practical.